As the Russia-Ukraine war drags on, with Russia facing increasingly tough challenges, North Korea has suddenly sent tens of thousands of troops to support Russia. Although North Korean forces don't seem to impact the overall situation much, their involvement is shifting the direction of the war. This move has put the United States, South Korea, and NATO on high alert and left Beijing both frustrated and alarmed. Public opinion suggests that as the new center of the so-called axis of evil, the Chinese Communist Party may have lost its influence over its ally, North Korea. On October 30th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko in Beijing, reaffirming the close ties between China and Russia. However, Wang avoided commenting directly on North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia. On November 1st, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian stated, "North Korea and Russia are two independent countries. How they develop their relationship is their own business." Former CIA senior intelligence official Dennis Wilder recently shared at a Washington think tank seminar that Beijing's silence on this matter is shocking. He believes this silence mainly stems from the unpredictability of North Korea's leader Kim Jong-Un, which puts the CCP in an extremely challenging position. What truly unsettles the CCP is that Russia now appears to hold more sway over North Korea than China does. Since Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine, the regions of NATO, the Middle East, the Taiwan Strait, and the Korean Peninsula have seen significant upheaval. Together, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are forming a powerful alliance that threatens global security. Last November, at the 15th Halifax International Security Forum in Canada, Chairman Peter Van Praag introduced the term KRINK to describe this alliance of nations. The term merges the initials of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and has been interpreted by some as the new Axis powers. While the West has long viewed these four countries with suspicion, connecting them as an organized alliance marks a new perspective. These countries share a strong anti-American and anti-Western stance, authoritarian governance, and support for international terrorism, all backing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Among them, China stands out as particularly dangerous, largely because the other three countries, heavily sanctioned, depend economically on China. As NATO sees it, China is the decisive enabler behind Russia's aggression in Ukraine. In a speech on May 26, 2022, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken remarked, "China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and, increasingly, the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do it. Beijing's vision would move us away from the universal values that have sustained so much of the world's progress over the past 75 years. Since the war in Ukraine began, Iran has supplied Russia with large numbers of drones, while North Korea has provided ammunition, and recently even troops. Although the CCP has not publicly provided arms, it continues to supply Russia with dual-use military and civilian equipment, and supports Russia economically against Western sanctions. In June of this year, after a 24-year gap, Russian President Vladimir Putin returned to Pyongyang, where he was warmly welcomed by Kim Jong-Un. The two countries signed a new comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. Article 4 of this agreement states, if either side faces armed invasion and enters a state of war, the other side will immediately provide military and other assistance using all available means, according to Article 51 of the United Nations Charter and the laws of each country. This agreement appears to conflict with China's strategic interests, making the Beijing-Pyongyang relationship less significant. According to the South China Morning Post, Sidney Saylor, a senior advisor on North Korean affairs at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, believes that North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia reflects the two nations' intent to benefit from this June agreement. Public opinion suggests that the military cooperation between Putin and Kim Jong-un is aimed at sending a message to Xi Jinping. Saylor thinks Moscow's goals are both practical and symbolic, aiming to gather any support it can to reinforce its weakened forces on the ground. Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un likely hopes to gain tangible benefits from Russia in return for sending soldiers. Victor Cha, a former senior official with the White House National Security Council, commented that North Korea's military support is essentially a down payment on a security partnership with Russia, something Pyongyang could never obtain from Beijing. Jo Han-boom, a senior researcher at the Korea Institute for the National Unification in Seoul, noted that North Korea's troop deployment to Russia has crossed a Chinese red line. Strengthening ties between Pyongyang and Moscow could weaken Beijing's influence over North Korea. North Korea's support for Russia's war has brought Beijing's relationship with Pyongyang to a standstill. Professor Ramon Pacheco Pardo of King's College London observed that while China would not welcome North Korea's involvement in the Russian conflict, China can do little about it. In terms of China-North Korea relations, both nations have claimed to be mountains and rivers connected by a time-honored friendship. However, in reality, the blood brotherhood is not as solid as it once seemed. This September, according to the Korea Jong-Un Daily, North Korea and China have shown unusual signs of tension. Several North Korean sources revealed that Kim Jong-un recently referred to China as a sworn enemy due to Beijing's increased pressure on Pyongyang. In July, he reportedly ordered North Korean diplomats in China to stop worrying about China's opinion. In a report published in March, Han Ki-boom, a former senior official at South Korea's National Intelligence Service and a visiting researcher at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, noted that Kim Jong-un had identified the United States and Japan as century-long enemies, but regarded China as a 5,000-year foe. The cooling of Beijing-Pyongyang relations was further highlighted during North Korea's 76th National Day in September. According to reports, both Putin and Xi Jinping sent congratulatory messages to Kim Jong-un. In his message, Xi said, "We will enhance strategic communication and cooperation with North Korea and strengthen and further develop friendly relations between our two countries." This stood in sharp contrast to Putin's enthusiastic letter, in which the Russian president expressed confidence in strengthening bilateral relations, highlighting the high level of Russia-North Korea ties and affirming that they would continue to gradually reinforce the comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and North Korea. In 1961, China and North Korea signed the China-North Korea Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. This treaty stipulates that if either country is attacked, the other must provide assistance, including military support. Now there's growing speculation. If North Korea formally joins the Ukraine conflict and Ukrainian forces retaliate by striking North Korean territory, would China be forced to get involved under the treaty? This scenario has clearly put Beijing in an awkward position. It's evident that North Korea's ties with Moscow have become stronger than its relationship with Beijing. Through his actions, Kim Jong-un is signaling to the world that Russia is his true ally. Shi Yinghong, a professor of international relations at Renmin University of China, noted that China seems clearly very uneasy, possibly even angry about the North Korea-Russian military alliance. According to commentary by RFI, the close relationship between Putin and Kim Jong-un is partly due to shared isolation. While Xi Jinping promised Putin unlimited cooperation, this cooperation has its limits. Despite providing economic support and components that could potentially be used in weapons manufacturing, Beijing cannot openly supply arms to Russia, which frustrates Putin. For years, Kim Jong-un has sought technological assistance from China to advance his nuclear program, including satellite submarine technology. However, China, wary of Western pressure and fearing that a stronger North Korea could destabilize the Korean peninsula and pose a threat to itself, has refrained from granting these requests. French media Le Monde suggests that both North Korea and Russia have strong incentives to support each other. In exchange for supplying weapons and troops, Pyongyang may gain military and space technology assistance, food aid, revenue from arms sales, and protection from new sanctions on its missile and nuclear tests, as Russia would likely veto such actions at the UN. With North Korea's ongoing nuclear tests and frequent threats to destroy South Korea, China cannot openly express support. North Korea's increasingly provocative actions led to a trilateral security alliance between the United States, Japan, and South Korea at Camp David last year. This alliance, along with an increased U.S. presence near the Korean peninsula, has added to Beijing's sense of being encircled. Furthermore, this security cooperation may place additional pressure on China concerning Taiwan and the South China Sea. Experts believe that although North Korea relies on China for trade and aid, China has found itself paralyzed and powerless in handling North Korea's behavior. While China may indirectly support Russia's war efforts, it's unlikely to be pleased with North Korea's involvement. Kim Jong-un's actions ultimately bring no benefit to Beijing, either in the short or long term. There's also speculation about whether Beijing was aware of North Korea's decision to send troops to Russia, just as many wondered if China had prior knowledge of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The Chinese Communist Party may find itself in an uncomfortable position, as Xi Jinping may actually be looked down upon by both Putin and Kim Jong-un. Trapped in this passive, awkward stance, Xi avoids commenting on the new Russia-North Korea developments, and instead calls on other nations to not add fuel to the fire. Executive Dean of the School of International Relations at Nanjing University, Zhu Feng, shared in an interview that North Korea and Russia have essentially formed a military alliance. Although they would like to involve China in rebuilding a trilateral military partnership, China has chosen not to participate. He stated, "Going back to the 1950s does not align with China's interests. Instead, China aims to be a participant in the global order and promote peace." Despite being part of the so-called Axis of Evil, Beijing is concerned that North Korea's dispatching of troops could lead to an increased U.S. military presence around the Korean peninsula, intensifying global opposition against the Axis and undermining Xi Jinping's ambitions to reshape the global order. The term Axis powers originally referred to the alliance of Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan during World War II. Together, they signed the Tripartite Pact in 1940 to oppose the Allied forces led by the US and the UK. In 2002, former US President George W. Bush labeled North Korea, Iran, and Iraq as the axis of evil for their support of terrorism. In September, US Representative Rob Whitman, vice chair of the House Armed Services Committee, mentioned in a forum by the Center for a New American Security that the world is at a similar crossroads as it was in the late 1930s. In an event at the Hudson Institute on October 17th, he remarked that today's axis is even more capable of destabilizing global stability than it was in 1939. Whitman highlighted that drones downed in Ukraine frequently contain Chinese circuit boards and systems. He also pointed out that some of the weapons used in Russian artillery are sourced from North Korea, while drones deployed by Russia on the battlefield are manufactured in Iran. Whitman argued that most countries align with the U.S. in values, whereas Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and some violent extremist groups diverge sharply. He said these countries disregard rules and laws, devalue human rights, and aim to exploit others. Public opinion suggests that China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran are taking advantage of crises in other regions to incite conflicts, coordinate actions, and sow chaos in their own areas. A connected network of conflicts could ignite global warfare. In mid-October, tensions on the Korean peninsula spiked just as China concluded its Joint Sword 2024B military exercise targeting Taiwan. On October 16th, North Korea state media reported that around 1.4 million young people had volunteered to join or rejoin the military. North Korea had earlier accused South Korea of sending drones to distribute anti-regime leaflets all over Pyongyang, and on the 15th, blew up parts of roads and railways connecting the two Koreas. Christopher S. Chivas, director of the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, noted that if China attempted a military move on Taiwan, Russia might seize the opportunity to launch more aggressive actions in Ukraine or even threaten NATO territory. Iran could create instability in the Middle East, drawing U.S. forces into the region, and North Korea might escalate military threats on the peninsula. While these four countries might not sign a formal treaty, they could act in a coordinated manner in a crisis. China has long been North Korea's economic lifeline. From the 1960s to the collapse of the Soviet Union, Pyongyang played a seesaw game, skillfully balancing between China and the Soviet Union to secure aid during an era of intense ideological conflict. Now that China and Russia are in an era of unlimited cooperation, Kim Jong-un must decide who his true patron is. Pyongyang's stance could influence who holds more sway between China and Russia, and the warming ties between Pyongyang and Moscow has made Xi Jinping feel his influence over North Korea waning.